Some stories you can explain away. A noise in the attic. A shadow that moves when you blink. But some stories don't leave room for explanation. Tonight, I want to tell you two of them. Both are true. Both happened to real people. And by the end, you may never look at an empty room or an empty car the same way again. The woman who stood on his chest. This story was told to me by someone whose family lived through it firsthand. It happened to their uncle's father, a man we'll call William. William was not an ordinary man. He was a respected politician. Successful. Composed. The kind of man who didn't believe in things that couldn't be explained. That was about to change. It started on an ordinary night. William went to bed the way he always did. But a few hours later, he woke up. And he was not alone. A woman was standing over him. Not beside the bed. Over him. Her foot was pressed down against his chest, firmly. Like she had every right to be there. William tried to move. He couldn't. His body simply wouldn't respond. All he could do was stare up at her in the dark, frozen, while she stared back down at him. Eventually, he didn't know how long, he fell back asleep. He told himself it was a nightmare. A trick of an exhausted mind. But the next night, she came back. And the night after that. And the night after that. Week after week, the same woman appeared. Standing. Watching. Pressing her foot against his chest while he lay paralyzed beneath her. William reached a point most of us would reach eventually. He couldn't take it anymore. So he did something most powerful men wouldn't admit to doing. He asked his bodyguard to sleep in the room with him. It didn't stop her from coming. So William did something else. He went to see a priest. The moment the priest stepped into William's home, before William had even finished explaining, the priest stopped him. He already knew. This, the priest said, has the marks of black magic. William, a man who governed people, who stood in front of crowds without fear, felt his blood run cold. The priest told him there was only one way to break it. A ritual. Performed at midnight. William agreed without hesitation. On the night of the ritual, the priest began chanting. Prayers rising into the dark, candlelight flickering against the walls. And then, she appeared again. The same woman. Standing in the room with them, as if she'd been waiting for the invitation. The priest commanded her to leave William alone. She shook her head. I can't, she said. I'm bound to him. She told them that to undo what had been done, they would have to go back to the very place where the spell had first been created. The priest demanded she lead them there. She agreed. She led them to a nearby construction site, and in the region where William lived, the priest said, this wasn't unusual. People had buried things in the ground there before. Things meant to curse. Things meant to bind. She led them to a nearby construction site, and in the region where William lived, the priest said, this wasn't unusual. People had buried things in the ground there before. Things meant to curse. Things meant to bind. The woman pointed to one exact spot in the dirt. William and the priest began to dig. 30 minutes passed. And then, they found it. A small box. Inside it, a voodoo doll. And several personal items that belonged to William, things only someone close to him could have gotten their hands on. The moment William saw what was inside, something in him broke. He threw the box to the ground and began vomiting uncontrollably, as if his own body understood what his mind couldn't yet process. The priest burned the box. Everything inside it. Reduced to ash. And the woman vanished. As if she had never existed at all. Here's where the story takes a turn that still unsettles the family to this day. Later, William told his nephew, the uncle in this story, everything that had happened. And when he gave the exact date it had started, the uncle went pale. Because around that very same time, he'd been lying in bed at home with his dog beside him, when the dog suddenly jumped up, ran to the mirror, and began barking at it. Violently. At nothing. He brushed it off. Until the next day. When his mother told him about a dream she'd had, the same night. In the dream, she watched her son being dragged away by some kind of creature. Not an animal she recognized. Something massive. Something that didn't feel like it belonged on this earth. At the time, he dismissed it as nothing more than a disturbing coincidence. It wasn't until much later, when he heard William's story and matched the dates, that he realized. Whatever had been hunting William that night had reached into his family's home too. So I'll leave you with the same question this family has never been able to answer. Who placed that curse on William? And what would have happened if he hadn't found that priest in time? The Uber driver who wasn't driving anymore. This next account comes from a man in his 30s. He says it happened about 2 years ago, and that to this day, he's never been more afraid in his life. At the time, he was working night shifts at a warehouse. His car had broken down, so every night, he relied on rideshare apps to get home. It was just past 2 a.m. when his shift ended. He called for a car like he always did. The driver's name was Mark. Decent rating. Nothing unusual in the profile. A gray Toyota Camry pulled up minutes later, windows tinted far darker than they should have been. He didn't think much of it.
He got in.
Said hello, like he always did. Mark had long hair past his shoulders, a necklace, heavy rings on nearly every finger.
A little eccentric, maybe.
But people are allowed to be eccentric.
They made small talk. Work. Life.
Nothing out of the ordinary. And then, out of nowhere, Mark said something strange. If anyone tries to get into the car, don't open the door. No matter what. The passenger laughed it off, asked who would even try that.
Mark just smiled. You never know, he said.
They kept driving. Got on the highway. The passenger looked down at his phone for a moment. That's when Mark whispered.
Sure. He looked up. What? No answer. 10 seconds passed.
Be quiet, Mark whispered again. The passenger asked if he was okay. And Mark, tense, irritated, his voice dropping into something cold, snapped. Can't you hear the knocking? There was no knocking. They were doing highway speed. No one could possibly be outside that car. But Mark's expression had changed completely. Something behind his eyes had shifted.
Then he hit the gas. The car surged forward.
His head began jerking, back and forth, almost like a spasm he couldn't control. The car drifted across the lane.
Slow down, the passenger said. Nothing. Pull over, he shouted.
And in a voice that didn't sound like the same man who'd greeted him 20 minutes earlier, Mark said. It's already too late. The passenger looked up, and saw Mark's eyes staring back at him through the rearview mirror. Not watching the road.
Watching him.
Are you joking right now? He asked, his voice cracking. Mark turned his head, fully around, away from the road entirely, and looked him dead in the eye. Didn't you see the driver switch? The passenger froze. Mark's eyes looked different. Like whoever was looking out from behind them wasn't Mark anymore. The car was still flying down the highway. And the driver wasn't looking at the road at all. Look forward. The passenger screamed.
The car swerved hard.
At the last second, the eyes snapped back to the windshield. Then, under his breath, Mark started laughing.
Hey Mark.
Want to see what this guy's blood looks like tonight?
A pause.
Then, almost cheerfully. You're the one going to prison anyway. The passenger had no idea what any of it meant. But every instinct in his body told him the same thing. Get out. Now. He hit the SOS button on the app. Mark kept muttering to himself, like there was someone else sitting right there in the car with him. Someone only he could hear. The second the call connected to emergency services, the passenger screamed for help. And that's when Mark suddenly swerved onto the shoulder and slammed to a stop. He started shaking his head violently, like he was trying to throw something off of himself. Then he screamed one word. Sharp run. The passenger didn't wait to ask why. He threw the door open and ran into the dark. When he glanced back, Mark was already out of the car, running toward him. Then he just stopped. Standing in the middle of the road, scanning the area around him like he had no idea where he was, or how he'd gotten there. He went to the trunk. Started digging through it frantically. Got back in the driver's seat. Got back out. Returned to the trunk again, searching for something that didn't seem to exist. And then, stillness. He stood there, staring into empty space. Not at the passenger. Not at anything. Then, without another word, he got back in the car and drove away into the dark. The passenger stood alone on the shoulder of a desert highway in the middle of the night, shaking, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally did, they told him they'd tracked the driver down. He made it home that night. But the shaking didn't stop for hours. The passenger stood alone on the shoulder of a desert highway in the middle of the night, shaking, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally did, they told him they'd tracked the driver down. He made it home that night. But the shaking didn't stop for hours. 2 stories. 2 strangers. 2 nights neither of them will ever forget. If something like this has ever happened to you, a presence in your room, a stranger who wasn't quite a stranger anymore, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments. And if you made it this far into the dark with me tonight, maybe don't watch the next one alone.